Hey students, it's week 13. Um, I am more than halfway done with your poetry essays. I will say that for the most part, most of you are doing a lot better than the short story essays. Um, but I think there are a few concerns that I have that I just generally want to address the class with. One is you do need to be coming up with interpretations of any of this literature, be it short story, poems, plays, novels, and I will readdress what that kind of looks like, particularly with a play today. But in general, you should not just read a poem and come to no conclusion about that poem. So, for instance, a poem is not just about a red wheelbarrow. The poem is trying to say something more, maybe about the fragility of life or how dependent we are upon other things in order to exist, right? So we want to be sure that we're constantly pressing that critical thinking skill to determine what an interpretation of a poem would mean. That said, I'm really hoping that I'm going to be finished with your poetry essays in the next week. So be sure you are checking turnitin.com for all of the comments. Not just your grade, but of course the comments, because I want you to get better every time that you write these things. Some of you also are still struggling with like how to just generally construct an essay or like to construct a thesis. And for that kind of help, certainly you could always come visit me during office hours. But the other thing that I would strongly suggest to you is to maybe visit the Learning Success Center and make an appointment with a tutor. These are skills that you probably should have picked up. Maybe for some of you, it's been a while since you've taken 1A. But you do really need to understand how to construct a claim, a working thesis, an argument. Essentially, that's what this whole class is designed around. This week, I'm super excited to be reading The Glass Menagerie, one of my absolute favorite plays of all time. It's by Tennessee Williams. And just to kind of give you a little bit of a heads up, so we're going to just be spending this last 2 weeks talking about the Glass Menagerie. This week we're going to read the play and, of course, discuss it. And you will be writing about this play too. So I personally would be taking a ton of notes, not just during your reading, but maybe during your reading of the discussion board and things like that. Next week we are going to be watching the film. And the film version that we're going to use is through the library. So I'm going to be providing you with a link that you can just click on and watch that film. But for those of you who have access to, I don't know if it's on Netflix or something like that or Amazon or whatever, but those of you who are interested in trying to see it sooner than later, the version that we are going to be watching is the one starring Katharine Hepburn from 1973. I do need you this week, though, just to fully that was a Freudian slip, solely focus on the text as written by Tennessee Williams. So that is only what we're talking about this week. So certainly read through that play, write your discussion board, write your notes out as you're thinking about this play, and then maybe seek watching a film version, because part of what we're going to be looking at is the difference between what's actually written on the page and the film version. So you'll want to be able to make those distinctions. Also, too, we are going to be looking at some critical interpretations of the play next week. In fact, your book has a whole section devoted to the Glass Menagerie. In fact, it's called Interpreting Amanda, and they give us like a whole bunch of different critical essays and pieces that were written throughout the years, throughout many, actually I think over a few decades. And that starts on page 722. And we'll be looking at that, but along with the database from the library as well. So Tennessee Williams, just to give you a little bit of background on him, he was born in 1911. His real name is Thomas Lanier Williams. He often went by Tom. And you'll see that kind of symmetry with Tom Wingfield in the Glass Menagerie, which is, there's a lot of interesting connections that happen there. He was born in Columbus, Mississippi, but then his family moved to St. Louis, and so that's where he actually grew up and spent a lot of his time, his formidable years in St. Louis. In fact, many of his plays, not all of them, but the Glass Menagerie actually takes place in St. Louis. So he uses it as a backdrop for a lot of what he's working with. He had a tumultuous relationship with his father. His father often worked a lot, and so was kind of an absent father. And his mother was kind of overly nurturing to him and his sister. And again, you'll kind of see, I bring those 2 points up because you're going to see that symmetry within the Glass Menagerie itself. It's interesting how writers often take their own experiences and put them into the lives of our character to kind of give them that depth of character that we are looking for. He was attending the University of Missouri, and his father forced him to drop out, and he ended up working in a shoe company, which he hated. And at night he would come home after working there and would start to write. And he wrote really voraciously from the time he was 11, really up until his death. And but while sort of writing and working at the shoe company, he decided to later return to the University of Iowa, where he got his English degree. And he wrote plays, and he did sort of odd jobs and wrote plays here and there. And the Glass Menagerie was his first huge hit. In fact, it ended up on Broadway, which is really just enormous for a playwright. He won Pulitzer Prizes. A lot of his plays ended up in films. So you can see here is a famous still from Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. If you are a film buff, you probably are very familiar with this movie. I do not know a lot of modern day movies, but I do know a lot of older movies, and Paul Newman and Elizabeth Taylor's performance of Cat on a Hot Tin Roof is just absolutely iconic, and I think it went on to either be nominated or win some Academy Awards. But that is originally a play that Tennessee Williams wrote. Same thing with A Streetcar Named Desire, starring Vivien Leigh. Well, this is the film. Again, this is still from the film. The play was written by Tennessee Williams, later adapted. But it was Vivien Leigh who was in Gone with the Wind, and Marlon Brando. Just for like a little piece of sort of film reference here, I've actually never seen the movie Rocky, but I guess there's this iconic scene that actually is a play on the iconic scene from A Streetcar Named Desire. And again, you could just see all the layers of literature sometimes when you know the original connection pieces. But the character Stanley Kowalski, right here, Marlon Brando, at one point is yelling to his wife from the bottom of a staircase, "Stella!" And it comes from Tennessee Williams' play there. Tennessee Williams figured out that he was gay, but of course at this time you could not be gay, and openly gay, that is, and expect to have a normal life. And so he was a very closeted gay man. And in fact, his longtime assistant and lover, I think, died in the 60s and sort of left Tennessee Williams kind of brokenhearted for the rest of his life. His work often deals with sadness, loneliness, and the search for love, which again, you'll see in the Glass Menagerie itself. So when you are reading this week, I want you to remember that there is not a thing, nothing, no thing is an accident. What makes these pieces of literature so canonized, so iconic, is that every little thing in here can be tied back to the theme in some way. So as you're reading, in fact, I would make a list of a lot of this stuff here and try to figure out how it connects, who it connects to. The Glass Menagerie itself, who does that represent, right? And how does it represent, right? We often see this is Laura's collection of little glass animals, but does it represent other things about this family? Music is a big one here. Music is played a lot. Particularly Laura plays the vitrola, but there's also sort of music happening in the theater itself. And what do those songs represent, and how do they tie back to what's going on, the emotional tone of what's going on? Tom visits the movies a lot. What does that mean? You'll also see this interesting device sometimes where there'll be some stage direction that will tell the reader, hey, here's this thing that's going to go up on the screen. Sometimes they almost read like little headers, and it was really kind of forward thinking at the time from Tennessee Williams. But also it ties back into this larger idea of memory. We have lights and candles, and of course that has meaning. The clothes. At one point, Amanda comes out in this really old sort of ball gown that she used to wear. And how is that representative of her and maybe what she kind of represents? The fire escape certainly is huge. It's one of the first sort of setting details we get. It totally ties into the theme of the play. The yearbook that Laura pulls out, right? We can sort of see that that's directly connected to memory and yesteryear, and those are the ways in which Laura kind of dives into that stuff. The warehouse, where Tom is just, he hates working. He's absolutely kind of stuck in this place where he does not want to be, and what that represents. There's also this really creepy photograph of the father who's absent, but totally in all of these scenes because he's like peering over the family. The portiers, right, are dividing not just rooms on the stage, but they're also dividing the audience from what's happening with the family. So again, everything has meaning here, and your job is to just not read and understand, well, what's happening in the play, but also to read and understand what's happening with all of those symbols. The characters, same thing. Every character, you should understand, and there's only 4 in this play. In fact, Jim has a very small role. The 3 main characters are Amanda, the mom, and her 2 children, Tom and Laura. And so by the end of this play, you really should be able to answer all of these questions. What does each character want? Part of the driving factor in any story is desire, character desire, motivation. What do they want? What do they fear? What do they hope for? All of those kinds of things. So ask yourselves, not just what in the moment, what do they want, but what do they want maybe for their future? What do they want for each other? I've given you an example here. Like, what does Amanda want for Laura's future? What is she actively trying to, force Laura to do? What do they want of each other? Particularly, like, what does Amanda want for Tom to do for her? Initially, she sort of asks him to set up Laura, but there's other things that she wants from him too. What do the characters fear? What are their worries? What are their concerns? What are their character flaws? Every character has sometimes not just one flaw, but many flaws, and what are they? And what objects are associated with that character? Again, think about, clothing and the Glass Menagerie itself, right? Do the characters want to change? Do they want to stay the same? Do they want to escape their situation? What do they want with that? And then lastly, when the play is over, what is going to happen with those characters? These pieces of literature are always complete in that we might not have all of the answers, but all of the answers are somewhere on the page. And that's where we have to kind of do the interpretive work and say, well, now that it's over, what likely happened with Tom, for instance. Lastly here, I just want to point out theme. So again, I want you to come up with a working theme here. It doesn't have to be correct. I'd rather you just try at something than to come up with nothing. But really, theme is more than just the actual subjects or the topics of a play. For instance, I could tell you that one of the subjects of the play is escapism, right? And familial obligation. We all deal with those kinds of obligations, right? Obligation to family, to taking care of them, to paying the bills, to making sure everyone's okay, right? But this play, the theme is more than just that topic. It's trying to say something about that subject. And so you might ask yourself, okay, is the play trying to tell me that we're all obligated to our families, or that we're not obligated to our families, or that we're obligated to our desires? So be asking yourself those questions as you read through. And you might find that the play has multiple themes. Perfectly fine. In fact, it usually does, right? For every topic or subject that there is in a play, you're going to probably come up with some kind of interpretation that the play is actually moving towards. So again, by the end of this, right, and you don't have to have all the answers as soon as you close the book, right, but be thinking about them, right? What would be an arguable interpretation about the play itself? So usual stuff for the week. You have a quiz before Wednesday, a discussion board before Thursday, and then 2 responses to discussion board posts by Saturday. I do want to have a live chat this week about this play, especially knowing that we're going to be writing about that. There's also that extra credit with Chris Garcia this week, so I certainly would love to meet a lot of you and see you there. I posted the directions for that if you want to attend and get extra credit in an announcement. So if you do have any follow-up questions, be sure you let me know, and I will see you all soon. Bye.